So in station 4 we go through some basic bone terminology. We'll start with a process. Process is a very general term which refers to just about anything that's protruding from the bone. So example here, here, all the lumps and bumps sitting on this bone, and for every bone for that matter, can be categorized as under the one general heading of process. But underneath that heading we've got lots of different types of processes. So the first we've got is a head. So here is an example of a head. It can be defined as a bony expansion on the end of a narrow neck. So notice here we've got the big bulge, or in this case it's round or spherical, and then it narrows right down, which is the neck there. So this is the head, this is the neck. The next on the list there we've got is a condyle. So in difference from a head, a condyle again is a bony expansion. And here we have an example here and another example here. But the difference from a head is that it does not contain the narrow neck. So this end here we've got a narrow neck with a head. This end here, it just goes from the bony shaft into this large rounded process. And we've got two, one on one side and one on the other. The term epicondyle refers to the term epi meaning on, essentially is a condyle on a condyle, or in this case a small condyle on the outside of a condyle. So if the whole lump is the condyle, then the epicondyles are just a raised section of bone on the outer edge of the condyles. These are a lot more difficult to see when looking at a bone because they clearly don't stick out anywhere near as much as a full condyle. Move to the next definition is called a facet. So I'll remove the femur there and I'll put down a typical thoracic vertebrae. And our facets are these little things sticking up here. And there's a lot of examples on this bone, but there's a facet and there's a facet. So what I'm referring to is the small, smooth, shiny surface on top of this big process or lump. So on a vertebrae, these are called the superior articulating facets. And we also have another set underneath, and you can see the two little small flat surfaces underneath. They would be the inferior articulating facets. And when I use that term articulating, what I really mean is joint. So if these are superior articulating facets, that means that they will attach or form a join with another facet which is coming in from another bone. The next example we've got is a foramen, and I'll stick with the example of our thoracic vertebrae. A foramen is a rounded or oval opening through a bone. So here we've got a foramen running straight through the middle. This is called the vertebral foramen. It literally is referring to the hole through the middle of our vertebrae. And they occur in every vertebrae. Other examples of foramens we might see occur here on the coxal bone. There you've got a big oval or opening through a bone there. That's another foramen. I'll stick with the coxal bone, and when I say coxal bone I'm referring to, forms part of our pelvic girdle or our hip bone. This whole thing is the coxal bone. We have what's called a crest, which is a ridge of bones. So the example of the ridge here, or the crest, is this forms right across the top of our coxal bone. So in this case, because the top part of the coxal bone is called the ilium, this is actually called the iliac crest. We see another example in the tibia, and in this example it looks a little bit different because it's this ridge that runs right down the middle of the bone. It's almost like a stripe where the bone comes to a point. This is called the tibial crest. The next definition we want to talk about is a fossa. So a fossa can be referred to as a shallow basin-like depression. So it's a nice basin-like, it's a little bit concave, it's very shallow, and it's almost like basin. So there's an example of a fossa. If we flip it over, there is actually another example of a fossa. This example here is another example of a fossa. So on a scapula, this is our scapula, there's 3 different fossas. See other examples of fossas here on the coxal bone with this surface here, another fossa. See another fossa on this side as well. A trochanter. We see 2 examples of a trochanter, and they're the only 2 that occur in the body. There's an example here and there's an example here. This is an example of the greater trochanter, and this is an example of the lesser trochanter. The definition of a trochanter is that it's just a large, blunt projection. So we're looking here for a large, blunt object that's just sticking out. There's one there, there's one there. Clearly visible, large enough to see from a distance, with no real defined shape. A tubercle, on the other hand, it's almost the opposite. It's a small, rounded bump on a bone or process on a bone. So here we've got an example of the rib tubercle. So we see the rib shaft come around and there's a nice little round bump. It's an example of a rib tubercle or a small, rounded process. Finally, we've got a tuberosity. As I move back to the tibial bone, a tuberosity are very difficult to see because they can be characterised as a broad, rough projection. So our tibial tuberosity, which is this section here on the bone, it's just a little bit more elevated than the rest of the bone. You can see it's broad, meaning there's no real defined shape. This section here is called the tibial tuberosity. Now in general, all these bumps are there for a reason, and they can be different reasons. But as we will learn that bones respond to the stress placed upon it. If there's a bump on a bone, that means that generally either there's a lot of weight on that section of the bone, causing the bone to respond by becoming bigger and stronger, or there's a point of a muscle attachment. So here we've got an example of a broad, rough projection. And this is because a number of muscles insert here.